Daniel Cooper woke up choking on sand. His mouth was full of it. His nose was full of it. Every breath pulled more of the burning stuff into his lungs, and he rolled onto his side, coughing and spitting until he could finally draw clean air. The twin suns of this world hung above him like two angry eyes, and the heat pressed down on his body like a physical weight. He tried to remember what had happened. The ship. The alarms. Lisa pushing him toward the escape pod. The terrible sound of metal tearing apart. He sat up slowly and looked around at the endless dunes that surrounded him. The escape pod lay half buried 20 meters away, smoke rising from its cracked hull. He was alone. He was alive. He did not know which fact hurt more. His survival suit had kept him breathing during the crash, but the display on his wrist showed damage to several systems. Water recycling was functioning at 60%. Temperature regulation was failing. He had maybe 2 days before the desert killed him. Daniel forced himself to stand. His legs shook beneath him and his head pounded with a fierce pain, but he stayed upright. He was not a soldier. He studied alien life forms from the safety of laboratories and research stations. He had never been trained for survival situations like this, but Lisa had pushed him into that pod. Lisa had saved his life. He owed it to her to keep breathing. Walked toward the escape pod, hopping to find supplies or a working communication system. The sand shifted beneath his feet with every step, making the short distance feel like a marathon. He was halfway there when he heard the sound. It was a clicking noise, like stones being tapped together in a rapid rhythm. He turned and saw a figure standing on top of a nearby dune. It was not human. The creature stood on 4 thin legs and had 2 arms that ended in delicate hands with too many fingers. Its body was covered in plates of dark chitin, and its head was dominated by 2 large eyes that sparkled like crystals in the sunlight. It watched him without moving. Daniel raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. The creature clicked again and then vanished over the far side of the dune. Daniel reached the escape pod and pulled open the emergency compartment. He found water packets, nutrition bars, and a basic medical kit. The communication system was destroyed. He sat in the shade of the pod and drank half a water packet while trying to decide what to do. He could stay here and hope for rescue, but his ship had crashed in uncharted territory. It might be weeks before anyone came looking. He could try to walk somewhere, but he had no idea where he was or which direction led to safety. He was still weighing his options when the sand in front of him began to move. A hand emerged, then an arm, then the same crystalline-eyed creature from before. It had tunneled beneath the surface to reach him. Behind it came 2 more of its kind, each one carrying tools that looked like weapons. The creatures surrounded him and clicked at each other in their strange language. Daniel stayed very still. One of them reached out and touched his survival suit, running its fingers over the patches and symbols sewn into the fabric. It made a sound that was different from the others, almost like a gasp. The creature turned to its companions and clicked rapidly. They all looked at Daniel with what he could only describe as wonder. The first creature, a smaller one with lighter colored plates, pointed at him and then pointed toward the horizon. It wanted him to follow. Daniel hesitated. He did not know these beings or their intentions, but he knew that staying alone in this desert meant death. He gathered his supplies and nodded. The creature seemed to understand. It turned and began walking, and Daniel followed. They walked for hours. The creatures moved easily across the sand while Daniel struggled with every step. The smaller one stayed close to him, occasionally reaching out to steady him when he stumbled. As the suns began to set and the temperature finally dropped, they reached a rock formation that rose from the dunes like a broken tooth. The creatures led him to a hidden entrance and then down into the cool darkness beneath the sand. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber lit by glowing crystals embedded in the walls. Daniel saw hundreds of the creatures going about their lives, trading goods, carrying water, caring for young ones that were no bigger than his fist. They all stopped to stare as he passed. The clicking sounds filled the air like rain on a metal roof. The small creature led him to the largest building in the cavern, a structure carved from the living rock itself. Inside, a group of elders sat on raised platforms. They wore decorations of metal and crystal that marked them as important. One of them was different from the rest. It was ancient, its chitin faded to a pale gray, and it wore a headdress that sparkled with inner light. This one rose when Daniel entered and walked toward him with slow, careful steps. It studied his face for a long moment and then reached out to touch the symbol on his chest. The symbol was nothing special, just the logo of his research company, but the ancient creature treated it like something holy. It turned to the others and spoke in a voice that was deeper than the clicking, more like the rumble of distant thunder. The small creature leaned close to Daniel and spoke in broken but understandable words. High Seer says the prophecy speaks true. The soft one who bleeds red has come from the sky. You are the one who will save us or doom us. You are king. Daniel opened his mouth to protest. He was not a king. He was not a savior. He was just a scientist who had survived a crash. But before he could speak, a tremor ran through the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling and the crystals flickered. The creatures began clicking in panic. The small one grabbed his arm and her eyes were wide with fear. Come, she said. The hunters smell new blood. She pulled him toward a viewing crystal set into the wall, and Daniel looked through it to see the surface above. Something massive was moving beneath the sand, circling the rock formation. It burst into view for just a moment, and Daniel saw rings of teeth surrounding a mouth large enough to swallow him whole. The creature seemed to sense his gaze. It turned toward the crystal, toward him, and Daniel understood why these people needed a king. He also understood that, prophecy or not, he might simply become food. 1 week passed in the underground city of, and Daniel still could not believe any of this was real. As the creatures called themselves, treated him with a respect he had not earned. They brought him food and water. They gave him a chamber to sleep in. They bowed when he passed through the tunnels. He hated all of it. He was not their king. He was not their savior. He was a man who had watched his friends die and done nothing to stop it. At night, when the cavern grew quiet and the glowing crystals dimmed, he dreamed of the crash. He dreamed of Lisa pushing him into the escape pod. He dreamed of her face through the closing door, calm and determined even as fire spread behind her. She had given her life so he could live, and he had done nothing to deserve it. Small, who had found him, was named. She visited him every day to teach him words in her language and to answer his questions about her people. Daniel learned that they had lived beneath these sands for thousands of years, hiding from the that hunted them. There were ancient predators, massive worm-like creatures that moved through sand and stone as easily as fish move through water. They could sense vibrations from great distances, and they were always hungry. They had once numbered in the millions. Now only a few thousand remained in scattered underground cities. They were a dying people, and they believed Daniel was their last hope. Not everyone shared this belief. Elder was the loudest voice against the prophecy. He was old and his chitin marked by dozens of battles against the. He came to Daniel's chamber on the 7th day and stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. "You are soft," said in his rough voice. "You have no claws, no armor, no venom that will eat you like they eat everything else. The prophecy is foolish hope from foolish seers." Daniel did not argue because he agreed with every word. He was soft. He was weak. He had no idea how to fight creatures that could tunnel through solid rock. Brought Daniel to witness an attack the next day. They traveled through narrow tunnels to a smaller settlement on the edge of territory. Daniel heard the screaming before they arrived. They had already broken through the walls when they reached the viewing chamber. Daniel watched through a crystal window as 3 of the massive creatures tore through buildings and bodies with terrible speed. Warriors fought back with spears and blades, but their weapons barely scratched the thick hide of the hunters. A warrior named stood at the front of the defense. He was young and strong, his movements fast and precise. He drove his spear into the eye of one, and it roared in pain, but another one came from below and caught him in its jaws. Daniel did not think. He ran. He burst through a side tunnel and into the chaos of the attack. He grabbed a fallen blade and swung it at the holding. The blade bounced off harmlessly, but the creature turned toward this new annoyance. Daniel kept hitting it, shouting, making himself a target. The dropped and lunged at Daniel instead. He dove to the side and the creature crashed into a wall. Daniel grabbed and dragged him toward the tunnel entrance. The other covered their retreat with thrown spears and desperate attacks. They made it back to safety just as the tunnel collapsed behind them. Survived, though his wounds were severe. Found Daniel in the healing chamber sitting beside the unconscious warrior. "You saved one," said. 43 died. What good is one life against 43? Daniel had no answer. He sat there until the crystals dimmed for the night cycle, watching, breathe, and wondering the same thing. He thought about Lisa again. She had saved one life against who knew how many. She had saved his worthless life and died doing it. Maybe was right. Maybe one life meant nothing. But Daniel was a scientist, and scientists solved problems. He began studying everything they knew about the. He examined their corpses when hunters managed to kill one. He tested their reactions to different sounds and vibrations. He analyzed the composition of tunnel walls where never seemed to attack. A pattern emerged. The hunted by vibration, not sight. Their eyes were small and weak, useful only for close range, and they avoided certain minerals that appeared in some rock formations. Daniel brought his findings to the council but dismissed them. "We know all of this already. It means nothing. You cannot coat an entire city in minerals. Seer summoned Daniel to the temple that night. The old led him deep into chambers that no outsider had ever seen, showed him carvings on the walls, images of creatures that looked like Daniel fighting creatures that looked like. The prophecy has two parts, said. The soft one will come from the sky. The soft one will either save us or become a feast for the hunters. Daniel stared at the ancient carvings. You expect me to die, he said. His crystal eyes reflected the light of glowing stones. I expect you to choose, the seer replied. That is what the prophecy says, the soft one will choose. They walked deeper into the temple past carvings that grew older with every step. Then Daniel saw something that stopped his heart. Letters, human letters, words written in a language that had not existed on this world until he arrived, except someone had been here before him. Someone had carved these words into the stone thousands of years ago. Daniel reached out with trembling fingers and traced the shapes. The message was simple. We tried. Ruth Bradley, Commander, Earth Survey Corps. Daniel turned to with wide eyes. There was another human here, he said, nodded slowly. The first soft one. She failed. She was eaten. But before she died, she promised another would come. Daniel looked at the ancient writing and felt the weight of 3,000 years pressing down on him. Lisa had died to save him. Ruth had died trying to save these people. And now everyone expected him to either succeed where she had failed or join her in death. He touched the carved letters one more time and made a silent promise. He would not let either of them down. Daniel spent 3 days in the deepest chambers of the temple with at his side. She helped him decipher more of the ancient human writing while he taught her to read the words herself. The story that emerged from those carved stones was both inspiring and terrible. Commander Ruth Bradley had arrived on over 3,000 years ago during humanity's first great expansion into the galaxy. Her ship had crashed just as Daniel's had, and like him, she had been found by thee and brought before their seers. Unlike Daniel, Ruth had been a soldier as well as an explorer. She had immediately begun planning how to fight the. Ruth's recordings were preserved in a device that had kept safe for all these centuries. The machine still worked, powered by crystals that they maintained with religious devotion. Daniel sat in the darkness and listened to a voice that had been silent for 3,000 years. Ruth sounded tired but determined. She explained that she had studied them for months and discovered a crucial weakness. The creatures were not individuals. They were connected to something larger, a Queen Mother who controlled all of them through chemical signals. If we can reach the Queen Mother, Ruth's voice said, we can end this war. The nest is located in a place they call the Bone Fields. I am going there tomorrow. If I fail, please know that we tried. Someone else will come. Someone else will finish what I started. The next recording was different. It was not Ruth's voice but her screams, the sound of teeth tearing through metal and flesh, the wet noise of a body being consumed. Daniel stopped the playback and sat in silence for a long time, put her hand on his arm but said nothing. There was nothing to say. Ruth had gone to fight the Queen Mother and the Queen Mother had eaten her. They had built their entire prophecy around Ruth's final promise that another human would come. Daniel was that human. He was supposed to succeed where a trained soldier had failed. He brought his findings to the council the next morning. He explained what Ruth had discovered about the Queen Mother and the Bone Fields. He showed them the mineral analysis he had completed and his theory about how certain compounds could disrupt the chemical signals that connected them to their queen. Elder listened with his arms crossed, but this time he did not interrupt. When Daniel finished speaking, stood slowly. My clutch mother was killed by when I was young, he said. I have hated them my entire life. I have hated the prophecy too because it asked me to hope, and hope is painful when it dies. He walked toward Daniel and stopped directly in front of him. I was wrong to dismiss you. You have the mind of a warrior even if you have the body of prey. Tell us your plan. Daniel laid out everything he had learned. The Queen Mother's nest was hidden beneath the Bone Fields, a massive crater filled with the remains of thousands of victims. To reach it, someone would have to cross the Singing Wastes on the surface, a journey of 3 days through territory that they patrolled constantly. Ruth had made that journey alone. Daniel believed that was her mistake. She had tried to be a hero by herself. Daniel wanted to bring the knowledge back to the even if he failed to kill the Queen Mother himself. Someone would need to guide him across the wastes. Someone would need to protect him from the smaller hunters. Someone would need to carry his research back if he died. Step forward before he finished speaking. I will guide him, she said. I know the surface paths. I found him in the Singing Wastes and I will lead him back through them. Push through the crowd next. His wounds had healed but scars now marked his chitin. I will protect him, said. He saved my life. I owe him a debt. Daniel tried to argue. He did not want to risk their lives for his uncertain plan, but refused to hear his objections. They were coming with him whether he liked it or not. Spent 2 days preparing. Daniel mixed batches of the mineral compound that seemed to repel. He filled containers with the mixture and packed enough supplies for a week on the surface. Blessed them in a ceremony that Daniel did not understand but appreciated anyway. Came to him the night before they left and pressed something into his hand. It was a blade, old and worn, with symbols carved into the handle. "This was my clutch mother's weapon," said. "Carry it for me. Bring it back if you can." Daniel nodded and tucked the blade into his belt. He did not sleep that night. He lay awake thinking about Ruth and Lisa and all the people who had died because they were hungry. They left at first light of the morning cycle. The tunnels leading to the surface were long and dark, and Daniel felt the weight of stone pressing down on him with every step. When they finally emerged into the open air, the heat hit him like a wall. The twin suns burned overhead and the sand stretched in every direction like a golden ocean, pointed toward the horizon where dark shapes rose against the sky. "The bone fields are beyond those mountains," she said. 3 days if we move fast. 4 if we must hide." Daniel looked at the endless desert ahead of him and felt very small. Behind them, the ground began to shake. Dust rose from the entrance they had just left. They were attacking in numbers larger than anyone had ever seen. Daniel understood what it meant. The Queen Mother knew he was coming. She had sent her children to destroy his people before he could destroy her. There was no going back now. He turned toward the distant mountains and started walking. The first day nearly killed Daniel. The twin suns burned through his damaged survival suit and drained the water from his body faster than he could replace it. His legs trembled with every step. His vision blurred. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Moved across the sand like it was solid ground, her 4 legs distributing her weight perfectly. Walked behind Daniel, watching for threats. By midday, Daniel collapsed. He fell face first into the sand and could not find the strength to rise. His body simply refused to obey him anymore. Lifted Daniel onto his back without a word and carried him for the next 6 hours. Daniel drifted in and out of awareness, seeing flashes of endless dunes and feeling the rhythm of steady pace. When the suns finally set and the temperature dropped, lowered him gently to the ground, poured water into his mouth and pressed cool stones against his forehead. "You are dying," she said with her usual bluntness. "Humans are not made for this world." Daniel laughed weakly. "Humans are not made for most worlds," he replied. "We go to them anyway." He forced himself to eat and drink even though his stomach wanted to reject everything. He had not come this far to die of heat exhaustion on the first day. They rested until the larger sun began to rise, then continued their journey. Daniel felt stronger now, though still weak by any reasonable measure. He walked on his own while and watched him with concern in their crystal eyes. The singing wastes earned their name that afternoon. They entered a region where wind-carved rocks rose from the sand in strange shapes, and the wind passing through them created sounds like voices. Some were high and thin like children crying. Others were deep and mournful like elders singing funeral songs. Stopped walking and lowered her head. "The ancestors speak," she said. "They tell us to turn back." Daniel listened to the eerie sounds and felt a chill despite the heat. "What do you think they are really saying?" he asked, looked at him with something like surprise. "I think they are just rocks and wind," she admitted. "But I was taught to believe otherwise." Daniel nodded. "Belief is powerful," he said. "Sometimes it saves us. Sometimes it traps us. The trick is knowing which is which." They made camp in a shallow cave that night. Took the first watch while Daniel and tried to sleep. Daniel woke to the sound of clicking, urgent and loud. Was pointing toward the cave entrance where shadows moved against the stars. Scouts had found them. The creatures were smaller than the hunters Daniel had seen before. Perhaps young ones sent to track prey, but they were still terrifying. Their teeth gleamed in the moonlight as they circled the cave entrance. Daniel grabbed his containers of mineral compound and began spreading it across the ground. They hissed and retreated from the smell. They circled for hours but would not cross the line of powder. By morning, they had vanished into the sand. The third day brought them to rougher terrain. The sand gave way to broken rocks and deep ravines carved by ancient water. They moved faster here because they had trouble tunneling through stone. But there were other dangers. One of the ravines had unstable edges and slipped while crossing. He fell 10 meters and landed badly on his leg. Daniel heard the crack of chitin breaking and saw lying motionless at the bottom. He climbed down without thinking and found conscious but unable to stand. His leg was broken in 2 places. "Leave me," said through clenched teeth. "Complete the mission. I will slow you down." Daniel ignored him. He tore strips from his own clothing and bound his leg as best he could. Then he lifted the warrior onto his back and began climbing out of the ravine. It took 3 hours to climb back up. Daniel's muscles screamed with every movement. His hands bled from gripping sharp rocks, but he kept climbing because it had carried him, and now he would carry. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. When he finally reached the top, was waiting with water and bandages. She worked on his leg while Daniel lay on his back and stared at the sky. "Why?" asked as she worked. "Why do humans refuse to leave their wounded behind? Logic says one life is not worth risking two." Daniel thought about the question for a long time. "Because we believe every life matters," he finally said. "Not because it is logical, because it is right. Because if we start choosing who deserves to live and who deserves to be abandoned, we stop being human." It was quiet for a while. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than Daniel had ever heard it. "They used to believe that too," she said. "Long ago, before they came. We used to fight for each other. We used to hope. But generations of hiding and dying taught us to be practical. We learned to run instead of fight. We learned to calculate losses instead of grieve them." She looked at Daniel with her crystal eyes reflecting the fading light. "Maybe that is why the prophecy named humans. Not because you are strong, because you remember how to hope when hope seems foolish." They reached the edge of the bone fields as the sun set on the third day. The crater was vast, stretching to the horizon in every direction, and it was full of bones. Thousands upon thousands of skeletons lay scattered across the rocky ground. Daniel saw bones and bones and bones from creatures he could not identify. At the center of the crater, rising like a mountain of flesh and chitin, sat the Queen Mother's nest. It pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Daniel could feel it through the soles of his feet. He turned to and, "Go back to," he said. "Take the mineral formula, teach others how to make it. Even if I fail, you can use it to protect your cities." Shook her head. "We will not leave you." Daniel put his hands on her shoulders. "You must. Someone has to survive to tell the story. Someone has to remember that we tried." He gave her the containers of compound and the notes he had written. He gave the blade that had entrusted to him. Then he turned and walked into the bone fields alone. Behind him, he heard whisper a word in her language. It meant king. Ahead of him, the Queen Mother's hunters began to stir. Daniel walked through fields of the dead. Bones crunched beneath his feet with every step. He saw skulls with crystal eyes staring at nothing. He saw large enough to hold a house. He saw the remains of creatures that had come from worlds he would never know, all of them reduced to food for the Queen Mother and her children. The nest rose before him like a living mountain, its surface covered with openings that breathed out warm air and the smell of decay. Hunters moved across its surface like ants on a hill, but they did not attack him. They watched. They waited. The Queen Mother wanted to see him first. He found Ruth's survival suit halfway to the nest. It lay among the bones like a discarded shell, empty except for dust and a single piece of paper. Daniel knelt and picked up the note with trembling hands. The writing was faded but still readable. "Make them remember we tried," it said. Nothing else. No final wisdom. No secret weapon. Just a simple request from a woman who had known she was going to die. Daniel folded the note and put it in his pocket. Then he stood and continued walking toward the mountain of flesh. The entrance to the nest was a mouth. There was no other way to describe it. A circular opening lined with ridges that looked like teeth, breathing in and out with a rhythm that matched the pulse Daniel felt through the ground. He stepped inside and the walls closed around him like a throat swallowing food. The tunnel was dark and wet and warm. It smelled like blood and rot and something older, something that had been eating and growing for longer than human civilization had existed. Daniel followed the passage deeper and deeper, until it opened into a chamber so vast he could not see its walls. The Queen Mother filled the chamber. She was larger than anything Daniel had ever seen, a creature the size of a building with a body that seemed to have no end. Thousands of eyes covered her head, each one reflecting a different image of Daniel standing before her. Her mouth never stopped moving, always chewing, always consuming. Smaller brought her food in a constant stream, victims still alive and screaming as they were pushed between her teeth. Daniel watched in horror as a warrior disappeared into that endless mouth. The Queen Mother noticed his reaction and made a sound that might have been laughter. "The second soft king," she said. Her voice came from everywhere at once, vibrating through the walls and floor and through Daniel's own bones. "I remember the first one, Ruth. She tasted like determination and fear. You taste the same." Daniel forced himself to stay calm. "You can sense my emotions?" he asked. The Queen Mother's 1,000 eyes blinked in a wave that traveled across her head. "I sense everything. I have lived for 20,000 years. I was created to be a weapon, but my masters are long dead and I remain. I eat, I breed, I survive. That is all any creature can do." Daniel began walking slowly around the chamber as he spoke, spreading drops of his mineral compound from a hidden container in his sleeve. "What if there was another way?" he asked. What if you did not have to eat thinking beings to survive? The Queen Mother made that laughing sound again. Prey does not negotiate with predators. Prey runs or prey dies. You are prey. Daniel kept walking, kept spreading the compound. Ruth thought she could kill you, he said. She was wrong, but I do not want to kill you. I want to free your children. The Queen Mother went still. All 1,000 of her eyes focused on Daniel at once. Explain, she commanded. Daniel told her what he had learned, the chemical signals she used to control her children, the minerals that disrupted those signals, the compound he had created from those minerals mixed with proteins from his own blood. Human blood changes the formula, he said. It does not just block your signals, it replaces them. Your children will still hear commands, but they will be my commands. He showed her his hands coated with the compound. I have been spreading it since I entered your nest. Your hunters outside have already stopped responding to you. They are confused, lost, and soon the ones in here will be the same. Queen Mother screamed. The sound was so loud that Daniel fell to his knees and blood ran from his ears. She lunged at him with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. Daniel dove aside, but her teeth caught his leg and tore through flesh and bone. The pain was beyond anything he had ever felt. He screamed and kept spreading the compound with his bloody hands, painting it on every surface he could reach. The Queen Mother struck again and caught him across the chest. Ribs broke. Blood filled his mouth. But he kept moving, kept spreading the formula, kept fighting even as his body failed. The in the chamber began to act strangely. They bumped into walls. They attacked each other. They ignored the Queen Mother's commands to kill Daniel. She roared in fury and struck him again, and this time he could not get up. He lay in a pool of his own blood and watched her approach for the final kill. This was how Ruth had died. This was how he would die too, but Ruth's death had not been meaningless and neither would his. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Ruth's emergency beacon. The device was 3,000 years old, but he had repaired it during his preparations. It was meant to call for rescue. Daniel had turned it into a bomb. Make them remember we tried, he whispered and pressed the button. The explosion brought down half the nest. Daniel was thrown through collapsing walls and buried under tons of rock and flesh. The Queen Mother's death scream echoed across the bone fields and was heard in itself. Then there was silence. And came back, of course. They had never really left. They brought warriors from who had followed them despite the attack on their city. Together, they dug through the rubble for 3 days. They found Daniel buried under the Queen Mother's corpse, barely alive, his body broken in more places than anyone could count. But he was breathing. His heart was beating. He had survived. The remaining scattered without their queen's control. They became mindless animals, dangerous but manageable. They could finally fight back. They could finally win. Daniel recovered slowly in the healing chambers of tended by and watched over by. Elder visited him every day and sat in silence, simply grateful that his blade had been carried into battle against the enemy who had killed his clutch mother. When Daniel could finally stand, they wanted to crown him king. He refused. I'm not your king, he said to the assembled. I am what Ruth wanted to be. What Lisa was when she pushed me into that escape pod. I'm someone who tried. That is all any of us can be. He helped them build defenses using his mineral compound. He taught them to fight instead of hide. He sent a distress signal into space and waited for rescue, but he did not leave when it came. He stayed until they could protect themselves. On his last night in, found him looking at the stars through a viewing crystal. Will more humans come? She asked. Daniel nodded. They will, he said, and when they do, you will not be alone anymore. You will have allies who fight for you, who hope for you, who remember that every life matters even when it seems foolish. Stood beside him in comfortable silence. Outside, the sands of still shifted and sang, but the song was different now. It told of a soft creature who bled red. A king who chose to bleed for strangers. A feast that had fought back and won. They would sing that song for another 3,000 years until the next humans came, and then they would sing it together.